All right, everyone, it is 3 o'clock, so I am going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to ENG102. My name is Desiree Amy, and I'm going to be your instructor for the next 10 weeks. The purpose of this lesson has 5 topics. So number 1, we're going to talk about our course structure. Number 2, we're going to be talking about our course navigation, so how you can locate items, assignments, assignment sheets, all of that great stuff on our Blackboard site. Number 3, we're going to be diving straight into our course material. So thinking about what is literature and an introduction to literature. We're going to be talking about what is drama, an introduction to drama. And then finally, we're going to be talking about more specifically the Western canon. The very last piece that I'm going to be covering is how to download Microsoft Word if you don't already have that on your computer. So let's go ahead and get started. In terms of our course structure this summer term, this is an entirely online class, but we have both synchronous and asynchronous components, which means that we are meeting face-to-face or screen-to-screen, real-time, as well as doing some work that is not real-time work, like discussion boards. So to outline that for you, I have our meeting times listed up here on the screen. From 3 to 4 p.m. on Mondays and 3 to 4 p.m. on Wednesdays, we have our synchronous or in-person meetings. Every Monday, we'll have a weekly lesson in which I cover the content for that week. And every Wednesday, we'll cover whatever type of writing you are working on that week. I will be hosting a workshop so that we can look more specifically at your writing assignments. Both the Monday and the Wednesday meetings are entirely optional. So if you can't make it to a meeting, no harm, no foul. I will always post the recordings of these meetings to Blackboard. So those will be posted to our weekly folders that I'm going to show you as we navigate the course together on the next slide. So 3 to 4 on Mondays and Wednesdays is my time that is designated for this class. Now, in addition to our synchronous meetings, we also have some work that you are doing at your own pace, but that are due by the week. So discussion board assignments are due each week, or some component of a discussion board is due each week. The way that the discussion boards in this class are designed is that you'll be working on 2 separate discussion boards each week. So during week 1, you're answering your initial post prompt for discussion boards 1 and 2. Then during week 2, you'll be responding to your peers' initial posts for discussion boards 1 and 2. In order to keep track of your discussion board responses, I think it's important for you to download and have readily available your course schedule. And I'll show you where to access that when we navigate the course as well. In addition to working on weekly discussion boards, you are also going to be responsible for 2 quizzes per week. Those quizzes cover the readings that are assigned for that week. And I'll show you where to find those as well. Now, discussion boards and quizzes are the only things that are due by the week. You will have various other assignments, and I'll show you how to find where those assignments are due, as well as where to find those assignment sheets as we navigate our Blackboard site. The majority of this class is based on essay writing. You do have 3 major assignments that are going to be a little bit more sustained than just the weekly work. That is Essay 1, Essay 2, and your research paper. For each of these larger compositions, we're going to be practicing the writing process, which means that you will turn in multiple drafts of all of these sustained writing projects. Now, in turning in multiple drafts of these, that means that we're going to be meeting for mandatory meetings or one-on-one conferences after every first draft that you turn in. And so those are marked on our schedule as conferences or conference signups. All right, moving on from our course structure, I'm now going to cover our course navigation and to demonstrate that for you looking at our Blackboard site. So to give you an overview of what all is going on right now, we are going to be looking at your Getting Started page, your home page, your coursework and material tab, your office hours tab, and your resources tab. I'm going to go ahead and switch from our PowerPoint here to our Blackboard page. Now, when you log into Blackboard and you are on our course site, this is what you are going to see. So this is the landing page or the very first page that you see when you go into ENG102. This is our getting started page, and on this page you have some really important administrative information that's not going to change for the entire semester. So this is a quick reference for you to verify which textbook and technology is required for this class. It's where you can always access our introductory letter. You can find our course grading information here so that you know exactly how the breakdown of the grades goes and how each assignment will impact your grade or influence your grade. You have access to our course syllabus, which outlines all of the policies and objectives for our class, as well as one access point to our printable course calendar. So this is where you can download our course calendar so that you can see the big picture view of when everything is assigned for readings and when everything is assigned as due dates. So this is our entire course schedule. That is all located on our Getting Started tab, or the first page that you'll see when you first log into our Blackboard site. The home page that we have here, I do not change anything on our homepage manually except for our announcements. So the most important thing that you need to pay attention to on your homepage is this My Announcements box. When I send out announcements, that means that I've got something important to tell you. So it's important that you read fully through an announcement. That way that you are staying up to date on any changes, any adjustments that I'm making to the course. This is also a way for me to give you additional resources to help you with the assignments and the work that you're doing in the class. Now, each week, you can always expect to get an announcement from me sent out on Sunday or at the beginning of the week. And in that announcement, I'm going to overview everything that you have due for that week. So an example of this is the one that I sent out on our first day of this class, where I overview all of your assigned readings, your suggested readings, your due assignments. But I also give you information about framing that week's content. So it is important to read all of these overview announcements, as well as any other announcements that I'm sending out to keep us all on track and on the same page, so to speak. So we've covered our Getting Started page. We've now covered our home page. The next page we're going to take a look at is coursework and material. The coursework and material page is one of the most important pages on our Blackboard site. This is where you're going to spend the majority of your time. So on this page, I'm going to point out 3 of the major functions that you can find here. Number 1, we have another link to our course schedule. So that's the same course schedule that you see on the Getting Started tab, but you've got another link here because that is an important document for you to be following along with. Number 2, you have access to a folder called Assignment Sheets. This Assignment Sheets folder houses all of your assignments for the entire semester. So it gives you instructions as well as additional information about those assignments. We're going to navigate to that in just a moment. Before I do, I want to point out that we have a 3rd folder here, and that is weekly coursework and content, which is where you'll find all of your materials for the class. Now, as far as your assignment sheets go, there are 8 different types of assignments that I have assigned for this semester, and the descriptions of each of those assignments is available in this assignment sheets folder. So this will stay here all the time. You'll be able to access this so that you can look back on all of these assignments. Now, inside of each of the assignment folders, right now what you'll find is a downloadable assignment sheet. So if you're like me and you like to download that and keep it offline, or if you like to print that assignment sheet, you have the ability to do so. But all of that information is exactly as what you see pasted here on the front of that folder. So you can verify here all of the instructions for these assignments. Now, as the semester moves forward, if there are any additional materials like resources or videos that I make describing these types of assignments, I will upload those to the respective folders. So I'll just add that information there and send you an announcement to let you know what exactly is available and where you can find it. All right, moving back to coursework and material, I'm now going to go ahead and navigate into the weekly coursework and content folder. Keep in mind that in this folder, you do have 10 weekly folders. So that's one for every week of our course. And when you open up, you're going to see all of those weekly folders. So those are going to all stay here. So I'm going to talk to you first about this page. When you log in, you'll see that you have all of the weekly folders that are named after each of the weeks. What you see underneath the name of that week is a snapshot view of what you have due for that particular week. So this is exactly copy and pasted from our course schedule, but it's specific to that exact week. Underneath the weekly schedule that you see there, you'll also see links and passwords to all of our Zoom meetings that are scheduled for that week. Now, I will always send out these links in our opening announcement, our overview announcement, but if for some reason you lose that announcement or you're in a hurry, just know that these are always going to be available here as well. All right. Now, each week you're going to be working in a specific weekly folder. What you're going to need to do to access all the information is to click on the name of that folder, which is going to open up all of your assigned readings and assignments. Now, as far as your assigned readings go, if I've assigned you to read a PDF or a website, I have included a link to that inside of this weekly folder. Typically speaking, if you have a reading from our Norton Introduction to Literature, which looks like this, or from our Little Seagull Handbook, which looks like this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to include a reminder. So that looks a little bit something like reminder, read Norton Introduction to Literature, pages 110 through Introduction. For this first week only, I've also uploaded PDFs for those of you who are having a difficult time getting your hands on the textbook before week 2. So make sure that you do get those. Now, as you scroll down underneath all of the assigned readings, you'll notice that you have all of your assignment portals. So for example, here is discussion board 1. For the discussion boards, I always mark to let you know whether you're working on the initial post or if you're working on the pure response prompt. So here you'll click into discussion board 1 and look at all the people that did that. You'll click create thread and create your thread there. Go back. All right, each week you do have these quizzes that are available. Those will be available from 12:01 a.m. on Monday to 11:59 p.m. on Friday. And I will always annotate these quizzes with a description telling you what the quiz is covering. So typically speaking, it'll cover 2 to 3 of the readings that are assigned for that week, but I'll let you know which ones. That way you can be prepared before taking that specific quiz. All right, now our coursework and material is exactly where you'll be able to find all of your coursework and the content for the class. If you do find that something is missing, please reach out to me. I'm human, sometimes I make mistakes. And if you have a question about where to find something, it's very likely that somebody else has a question about where to find that. And that way I can make sure that everyone is able to find all the material that they need in order to complete that week's work. All right, we're now moving forward to office hours. Now, as far as our class goes, you do know that we meet synchronously from 3 to 4 on Mondays and Wednesdays. Each week I will also hold virtual office hours. Now, because of the nature of our class and because we've got a lot of things going on in terms of meetings, these virtual office hours will change each week. So I will post those at the beginning of the week when I send out your overview message. If ever you need to meet with me, though, you can always set up an appointment, even if it's outside of the described hours. But this is where I'm going to be posting all of the links to those Zoom rooms, the passwords, all that good stuff. So if you're interested in office hours, you'll just navigate to this office hours tab. Finally, I'm going to show you what we've got going on in resources. So because this is an English class and because we have many resources available on campus, and typically students know where to find these resources on campus, I went ahead and made a tab for how to find our on-campus resources online. For example, if you are interested in making an appointment with the Writing Center, I've made a folder that gives you all the information for accomplishing that, for setting up that appointment. And if I do receive any additional resources from the Writing Center, I will go ahead and post those to this folder. So that's how to make an appointment for the Writing Center. The Learning Resources Center is our library. So if you are looking for any material from the library, for example, our library catalogs, or you're looking for ebooks, you're looking for things that are housed in our library, I've set that catalog up here. There are some tutorials on how to use these resources, but potentially most importantly for you, we've got the Alabama Virtual Library link right here. So you can use that to access the AVL when it comes time for us to write your research paper. So that's a useful link there. All right, y'all, if you have any questions about our resources, my office hours, coursework and material, getting started, or the homepage, please feel free to reach out to me. Otherwise, I'm gonna make my way back to our PowerPoint so we can keep chugging along. All right, so that's everything in terms of the welcome to our class, what all is going on in terms of the structure and the navigation of our course. We're now going to switch gears just a little bit to the content that we're covering for this week. So you do have some assigned readings to prepare for your quizzes this week, and I do want to give you an overview of how this content fits into the overall makeup of ENG102 or English 102. So bear in mind that this English composition class is the second in a 2-course sequence. So you've already taken ENG 101 or the equivalent of that at whichever institution that you took English 1. English 102 is meant to be a much more research and literature heavy course. It's meant to build some analytical skills in order for students to focus on literary or primary texts. And to respond to those both verbally as well as in writing. So there are a couple of topics that we're going to be carrying us through the entire semester. Those 3 topics, at least during this unit, are going to be literature, drama, and the Western canon. In the second unit, we're going to be focusing on literature, short stories, or fiction, and the Western canon. Now, as far as introducing you to literature goes, I'm presenting you with a couple of questions here. And I do want to be transparent in that I am not going to answer these questions in this very first meeting that we have. That would be way too much. We probably need more than 10 weeks to even cover all of these questions, but they are the ones that are going to be at the front of our mind, as well as the framework for all of the work that we're doing as we're dealing with our primary texts or our literary texts. So in thinking about and approaching literature this semester, I do want you thinking about what is literature. Now, this is a question that you are approaching for the first time in our course as part of your discussion boards this week. I want you to be thinking about what does literature do for us? And what does literature do for large groups of people? What does literature do for schools? What does literature do for communication? What are the genres of literature? And when I talk about genres, what I'm talking about here is types or kinds of literature. So we are familiar with genres, especially in the context of music and movies, right? We know the difference between a horror movie and a comedy, or a rom-com and a historical fiction. We know the differences because there are specific conventions or expectations that an audience and an author or creator agrees upon, and if a particular text, like a movie, meets all of those qualifications, well, then it fits into that particular genre. Now, the specific genres we'll be working with more specifically in this class are dramas or plays, and short stories or fiction. But additional genres in literature include things like poetry and novels, novellas. And we can even think about this as an extension into things like pamphlets and Facebook pages and text messages, and all of these different kinds or types of writing and types of reading that we do that are coded by specific rules or specific expectations. So I want you thinking about what are the different types of genres of literature, and what makes that a unique genre or sets that aside from the other genres. and what function does that genre play in our society, or how do we interact with it as a reader? And then finally, I want you thinking about why we read literature and why we study literature, and what is the difference between reading literature and studying literature. Now, these questions, like I said, are going to carry us through the entire semester, but we're going to get a good first look at them as you were reading the introduction to the Norton Introduction to Literature this week. Now, as you're approaching literature in this class, I've got 3 tips for you in terms of getting in the headspace to read Shakespearean drama, or getting in the headspace to read Joyce Carol Oates or some of these other literary figures that we're going to be exploring and talking about this semester. Now, these tips that I'm giving to you, I'm pulling these from inside of our textbook, so these are part of your introduction. Tip number 1 is take a literary work on its own terms. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that we as readers bring a whole lot of baggage to the page when we sit down with a text. You, me, all of your peers, we all have different life experiences. And those life experiences influence the ways in which we read and we interpret and we think about particular topics. And that's okay. It's really great that we have a diverse group of people who are conversing. But it's also important for us to recognize that a literary work was not created in our own image. So upon first reading a text, in order to be open to the ways in which we can be impacted, or we can talk about that, it's important that we are adjusting ourselves to the work initially and not immediately trying to make it fit into our own image. We need to be prepared in this class to explore and to hear things that we don't typically explore or that we're not used to hearing about. And in certain ways, being ready to think about topics and things that we don't want to hear about, but that exist on that page and thus are something that we need to talk about because they are a part of that particular text. Understand that not all of these works are about your ideas. They're not all from your perspective, and they're not all from my perspective or from my ideas. It's important for us as we approach these texts to be tolerant of the work, to listen to the work, but also to be vigilant of the work and to pick up on ways in which we disagree with those works. That way we can talk about what we agree with as well as what we disagree with. And sometimes those are going to be pretty unanimous across the group, and sometimes they're going to be pretty polarizing across the group. Either of those is going to be a productive way for us to talk about how this literature embodies the real world, or how this literature impacts the real world. All right, tip number 2. Tip number 2 is assume that there is a reason for everything. We know that books are created by humans and that humans make mistakes, but I do want you to assume that any word or any punctuation that you come across in this textbook is meant to be that way, that the author intended for it to be that way, and that the editors intended for it to be that way. Because even though writers do make mistakes, the editing team for something as put together as our textbook shows a degree of verbal control, and it's very safe to assume that each of these rhetorical choices, or the choices that the writer and the editing team is making together, was done carefully and done in order for you as the reader to interpret that. So try to account for everything in the work, see what kind of sense you can make of it, and figure out a coherent pattern that explains the text as it stands. Now, each of us as individual readers with those various diverse backgrounds and experiences that we have, we're going to come across text and we're going to interpret different parts and pieces, and we're going to pick up on some peculiarities, and they're not all going to look the same, and that's good. This means that we've got about 9 different perspectives that are working simultaneously in order to build a more dynamic conversation around these texts, right? So be paying attention, but do assume that there is a reason for everything that you see on the page. All right, tip number 3, and my final tip right now as we get started on the semester, is to remember that literary texts exist in time and that time changes. Now, what I mean here is that a text exists in a particular context, and that context is triangular. So the overall context around the text is that we have an author, we have the text, and we have the audience, right? And each of these pieces of the largest context is an individual context in and of itself, which means that the author had things going on in his or her life. The author had read things before they'd written this, and all of these influences and experiences culminate in the text. Now, the text itself exists outside of the author and outside of the reader, and that means that it is an object in and of itself. The context that surrounds this text are things like history, things like sales, things like the context in which the text is being read, what it looks like on the page, how it's arranged on the page. These are all interpretable and all things for us to consider. And then, of course, we've got the reader, which is us, right? And what is our context? What time frame are we living in? What perspective do we have? What is the political situation or the social situation that influences the ways in which we approach the text or we think about the author? Now, we're going to talk about these contexts very heavily over the next 10 weeks, but this is something to certainly think about, and especially in terms of this tip. Not all of the texts that we're going to be reading are going to be from 2020. In fact, I think that the most recent text we're reading is maybe from 2012, which means that there is some separation between who we are as readers and the time frame in which we are currently living and the time frame in which these authors were producing these texts. And it's important for us to recognize that not only do the meanings of words change over time, like from the 17th century to the 21st century, but the entire ways in which we're acquainted to and we look at and we understand the universe, those things change as well. As technology changes, so does literature, so does language. As social ideas and movements happen, so does literature happen, and it changes, and there are different shapes to this. And our understandings as readers are built and are shaped by those same types of changes. So keeping in mind that time is constantly changing, and that consciousness of time works in two ways. Number one, you come to this class with an experience with and a knowledge of history. So you've taken history classes, you've watched the news, you know exactly what's going on in terms of a timeline, and that provides you a context for reading this work. So you understand and you come in with a basic knowledge, and then you build on that with the text. Well, in the same way, this work might be able to modify the ways in which you perceive or your notion of a particular time period or particular event that is being described inside of that text as well. So remember that all literary texts exist in time, and that time is constantly changing. There's a temporality to that. All right, moving forward to introducing drama. Like I said, we are exploring two specific genres of literature this semester. We are beginning with drama. So these first couple of weeks, we are going to be reading Shakespeare's Hamlet. And before we dive into that, it's important for us to think a little bit more broadly about this genre of literature and what kinds of unique qualities does the genre of drama possess that other literatures like novels and newspapers and advertisements that they don't have. So let's take a look at the definition of drama. Drama is written primarily to be performed by actors on stage for an audience. Now, drama includes different parts like dialogue, like stage directions. It has a narrator, an exposition, and it's meant to exist as a very multiplicitous text. Now, what I mean there is that we can engage with the text in many different forms or modes. In this class, we're primarily going to be sitting with this text in isolation. So we'll be reading Hamlet on the page, mostly in our heads or in our own homes, and we'll be contemplating that in that way. But it's important for us to understand that dramas, as they are written by playwrights or dramatists like Shakespeare, are meant to be performed. So that means that this is just a roadmap that's down on the page that is meant to communicate to experts like directors and actors how the play should take place. So it gives a roadmap to that. And we are reading that roadmap. In thinking about this in this way, right, there's one way to consume the text, which is to read it, but there's another way to consume or engage with the text, and that's to watch it. So according to the Norton Introduction to Literature, to attend a play, which means to be part of an audience, represents a very different kind of experience from the usually solitary act of reading. There are a lot of sensorial details that we engage with when we are sitting inside of a playhouse or an opera house. And one day we will be able to do those things again. This means that we've got things like the visuals and the stage props. We've got the ways in which we hear the actors' voices, the chemistry between those actors, how they interpret this text. And these are all working parts that we should be considering even when we are reading the text in solitary. And all things that we can consider. How would this play out if we move from the roadmap to the actual stage or to the actual world? Now, as we move through this unit on drama, we are going to be building a vocabulary that is specific to the genre, and that helps us to talk about the texts more analytically. To get us started with that, I've got some basic vocabulary terms here. Including narrator, stage directions, and exposition. A narrator is someone who is standing between us and the events. It is the person who is telling the story and most closely related to the audience. So who is telling us what is going on? Stage directions are not a part of the dialogue. They are not meant for actors to read out loud or to engage with one another verbally using stage directions. Instead, stage directions are going to be italicized descriptions of what the setting should look like when the act is taking place. It's descriptions of characters, it's descriptions of actions, but it's important to recognize that this is not something that's meant to be read out loud. Finally, your exposition is the explanation of the past and the current situations. I do want you to pay attention to, when you start reading Hamlet, the fact that the very first scene and the very first act is riddled with exposition. We find out a lot about what the conflict is and where the play is taking place and when and who is involved. And these are all of the details that make up the exposition, are the first of 5 phases of plot. Now, thinking about plot makes us think ahead. Next week's reading is Elements of Drama, and that's where we're going to be talking more specifically about the components of, or the parts of, a drama, like plot and character. We'll talk more in depth about exposition, stage directions, narrators, and even more specifically, we'll talk about the functions of all of these things as they relate to Shakespeare's Hamlet. All right, finally, I do want to introduce you to the Western canon. And in order to do so, I'm first going to define canon for you. A canon is the works that a particular tradition designates as being most essential for being studied by the young in a scholastic sense. So what that means is that the canon is a certain way of setting a rubric for the classics or the traditions or the traditional moves or literary devices that are important for schools to teach K through 12, as well as to teach in undergraduate and graduate classes. The canon sets the standard for excellence, or what is the best of the best in a particular tradition. And it's developed by input from scholars, teachers, and researchers over a period of time within a particular culture. It's constantly under scrutiny, it's constantly under advisement, but it's constantly also collecting and building. Now, the canon that we're going to be talking about more specifically in this class is the Western canon, which you'll read about this week on your Wikipedia page. But the Western canon is specific to the Western Hemisphere, which does not mean that all of the texts that are inside of the Western canon originate from the Western Hemisphere, but that they in some way are embodying or are engaging with the values and representing the values of the Western Hemisphere and Western society. Now, according to Harold Bloom, who is an American literary critic and researcher, scholar, Harold Bloom talked very heavily and played a really big part in contextualizing and defining the canon during his lifetime. And some of the advantages that he says are very essential to the canon, or very central to the canon, are these three things. Number one, there is cognitive power, which is the increased ability to think and to talk. He argues that in creating this standard for excellence that we then have on our bookshelves in a set of prescribed texts, we are teaching people how to think and how to talk, right? And we're being able to set a standard of excellence for these actions as well. Number two, he says that in reading the canon, readers then have an increased understanding of metaphor, which is known as rhetorical power. He says they're able to analyze the events in the real world around them, to interpret events, to interpret actions, to interpret images in the real world, because they've been able to practice this in these literary and fictive spaces. He says literature gives us a way to interact with a world beyond our fingertips. And by exposing us to more advanced language and more advanced imagery, it then in turn is training us to, in our real everyday lives, interpret and analyze situations quicker and more effectively. So an increased understanding of metaphor or rhetorical power. And finally, building off of this idea that there is a vast world beyond our fingertips, Harold Bloom argues that the canon helps us as readers to develop a real capacity for understanding otherness, which is a very fancy way of saying, hey, we can have empathy for people who are not like ourselves. And we can think critically about things that do not directly impact us in a very immediate sense. And he says that literature gives us the ability to do that because it confronts us with situations that we've never been in before, and forces us to think about those situations, which in turn develops into this empathy and capacity for understanding otherness in ourselves. We'll continue talking about the Western canon, both its benefits and its disadvantages, the ways in which it helps us perceive the world and the ways in which it limits our perception of the world. But the Western canon is very central to our class, seeing as it is very highly represented in our textbook. All right, y'all, so that concludes everything that I have for this week's lesson or lecture. If you have any questions for me, please do reach out. In these last couple of minutes, I'm going to demonstrate how to download Microsoft Word for free on your computer or your other devices. What I found over the last year is that a lot of my students were running out to places like Best Buy and Walmart to purchase Microsoft Word, which is a hefty, like $95 investment. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't have $95 laying around to purchase things like Microsoft Word. So I do want to show you that this is a resource that is available to you through Wallace Community College as an active member of our college community. And the way in which you are going to download Microsoft Word is you're going to log into your Outlook. You're going to select the options, and then you're going to move through the steps of downloading and installing Office 365. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the internet so that I can show you exactly how to do this. So step by step. So step number one, however you normally get to your student email account, that's exactly what you're going to do. And I'm doing that on Chrome here. So you're going to log in using your login credentials, and then you should open up to your inbox. Your next step is you're going to come up to these 9 boxes up in the left-hand corner. This is your app launcher or your options. So you're going to click on that app launcher. Now, when you open up your app launcher, you're immediately going to see some of these applications, which are great web-based applications, but they're not ideal for our class, and they are not downloadable here. Instead, these are all based on the web. So what you're looking for is Office 365 up in the right-hand corner of these options, because this is going to get us one step closer to installing Microsoft Word on your computer. Again, you'll see the apps here. Again, these are not the apps that you are looking for. Instead, you're going to want to press on Install Office, and you'll select the option that says Office 365 Apps. This will download permanent versions of these on your computer. And by permanent, I mean that you don't need the internet in order to use these. But instead, they're going to be available to you as long as you are a student here at Wallace Community College. Now, once you click on Office 365 Apps, it will pop up with a download box, and you'll be able to install that on your computer. If you have any questions about these processes, I do suggest that you reach out to the IT department, or you can reach out to me and we can troubleshoot that together. Either way, I hope you guys all had a wonderful first week of classes. I'm looking forward to a great semester, and I will see you all soon.